I think with the events are trying to do. Yeah, just watch. Yeah, if you can just make Right, but you didn't. Oh, but you didn't meet. Yeah, you didn't go to the Star Planet, right? She was there. Yeah, William and Bear was there. I think because they took slots. They think Jordan's the hottest spot. Need to keep this very clear. There you go. She's here now. That's what we're about. That's seriously what it's about. That's why we're here. Yes, we do. They're over on the other end. That's why I figured it was a good idea to do this because they're all It's really weird.
Hello. Thanks to everyone for coming out today. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. So if you want to grab a seat or come into this area, if you're here for the career panel, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out for our event. This event is in partnership between the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Washington, D.C. and the Society for International Development's Young Professionals Network in Washington, D.C. So we're going to give a little bit of an introduction to these organizations, and then I will introduce our panelists, and we will have some discussion on the panel, and then at the end we'll open it up to audience questions as well. And Carlia, where's Carlia? Carlia will have the mic if you have questions at the end. So I'm going to let Paul Sherman, he's a senior program manager at SID, tell you a little bit about their organization and the Young Professionals Network.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. I really appreciate it. My name is Paul Sherman, as Chris said. I'm Senior Programs Manager at SID-Washington, Society for International Development Washington chapter. So this is kind of what we do. So our bread and butter, we're a membership and events-based organization. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we host events like this all the time. For the purpose of sharing information and networking in the international development space. So we host, a wide variety of events. We host somewhere between, usually like an event per week. We host about, I think, almost 60 events a year. So we have something going on every pretty much every moment of the day. So check out our website. On the back of the flyer, there's also some of our upcoming events. I know there's some concerns about coronavirus going on right now. We're still moving forward with our events as planned, though some of them might get moved online as we move forward, but we're still going to be moving forward with our programming. So if you're interested in anything coming up, just head to our website. That's where everything will be. We'll also be, we'll be posting many more events over the course of the next couple of weeks, so you'll see those come up. And that's enough. And also, too, just plugging our Young Professionals Network. Our co-chairs aren't here tonight. But I'm sure they would want me to plug the Young Professionals Network. They do similar types of events with mostly kind of like this to give you an opportunity, the Young Professionals an opportunity to network and also kind of see kind of skill building events. So you see more of those more frequently. So that's enough for me. I'll hand it back to Chris.
Thanks, Paul. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Washington, D.C., we're actually a 501c3 NGO, and we're actually open. It's primarily Peace Corps volunteers, but you do not have to be a Peace Corps volunteer to join. We have Carlia. Where's Carlia? Carlia Brown. She's a board member here, and she heads up the professional development activities. So we have this career panel tonight, but she hosts about 20 other career panels a year. And we also have a mentorship program. We have cultural activities. We have volunteering activities. We have a lot of fun stuff. So please check us out if you want to get involved. We're open to anyone, even if you did not serve in the Peace Corps. If you believe in the principles of Peace Corps, please join us. So a couple order of business. Bathrooms are kind of right behind my shoulder, around the corner of the bar back there. Due to coronavirus, we have some hand sanitizer up front, and we just ask that you guys network and take advantage of this event, but we just ask you keep it a no handshake event. And I want to get an idea of our audience here, so our panelists can have an idea of who you are. How many people are currently working full-time in DC in global health already? Can you raise your hand? Okay, great. And how many people are not, but want to be working in global health? Okay, great. I think that's maybe 50-50. Wonderful. Okay. So I'll give you a brief introduction to our panelists, and they're going to go more into depth, tell you a little bit how they got where they are in their careers now, some of the lessons they've learned, and a little bit about what they do. I will start off by introducing myself. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I did rural health development in Kyrgyzstan, and I also worked on HIV/AIDS in Ukraine. And I've been working in DC for about 3 years. I've done a lot of business development as well as consulting. So without further ado, we're gonna start at the very end with Julie Becker. She is a Senior Vice President for the Global Health Division at Chemonics, and I'm just gonna pass the mic down to her.
We will use hand sanitizer, I promise. So you want me to go ahead and talk about my background? Okay. I thought you were going to introduce everybody, but that's fine. I'm really happy to be here. I did not go to the Peace Corps, but I often recommend that people do. I think it's a great thing. I've hired and worked with a lot of people who have been in Peace Corps, and I'm a big fan. But I got started in a very different way. I got started at a very young age when I was still an undergraduate, and I was taking a course in medical anthropology, and I was really interested in sort of the cultural basis of health and how culture impacts delivery of health services. And it was all very interesting, but it was very academic in those days. Medical anthropology now is much more applied, but in those days it was highly academic. And I just wanted to understand something about how health services are delivered. So, so I was a little bit scrappy, and I dug up an opportunity. I started asking everybody I know, how can I learn about this? How can I do something to help while learning? And I wound up getting I guess you call it an internship. I volunteered with a clandestine pediatric clinic that was located inside of a slum community in California that was where primarily undocumented immigrants lived, who were afraid to use the healthcare system. And so a pediatrician and a nun got together and put their own money into opening this clinic, and they wanted somebody to help them out. So I went there and I translated, and I, weighed babies, and I checked hematocrits and all sorts of things. And it was, I guess what it taught me is, it taught me about how difficult access to care is. And that's what sort of solidified my idea that I wanted to go into public health. So I applied to grad school, and in those days, they really didn't want you to go to grad school unless you had at least a year of real work experience, and they sort of discouraged that. So, so I got scrappy again. I moved to San Francisco, and I researched, what were the public health institutions there, and I found one called the Institute for Health Policy Studies at UC San Francisco, and they had a Center for Reproductive Health Policy. And I just read about their work and said, okay, this is what I want to do. I'm really interested in women's health. And so how am I going to get in there? So I made an appointment, and I went and I spoke with them and said I was really interested and I would like to volunteer, but I could only volunteer if I could find a way to survive. And so, they said, we'd love to have you. We don't have any money. And I went out and I got a job part-time at a hospital doing something related, but not quite public health. I was working in the research division there, and it paid the bills. And I volunteered at the Institute, and after a few months, they found grant money to pay me. And so I continued working at the hospital and at the Institute, and I developed some really highly desirable skills there. So in those days, it was at the very beginning of when, I don't know how many of you have used SAS for statistical analysis. So in those days, there were no menus. It was all programming language. And I learned at this place how to program SAS. And when I got to grad school, I was like the only person who knew how to do that. So all of the faculty members wanted to hire me as a research assistant. And I managed to get in on the first international collaboration on AIDS research. That was a collaboration between Harvard and the government of Mexico, and worked on the behavioral section of that, analyzing data. And it was an amazing experience, and I got my foot in the door internationally. And it was sort of the start of a very long career that for many years focused on HIV, but also on women's health, looking at the intersection of HIV and women's health. And I wound up, I worked very briefly domestically, but I wound up working for a series of different NGOs at the intersection of women's health and HIV. It was really easy for me to get jobs in those days because not only did I have SAS skills, but very few people at that time had HIV experience because it was very early in the epidemic. And so I guess I'm telling you this story because I think it's really important to figure out an area of knowledge or a skill that's in high demand and going to be in high demand. And that's how I was able to really almost have my pick of jobs at one point because there were very few other people had that. So I'll talk a little bit more later about what I think some of those skills might be, but I guess I'll leave it there for now. I'm not seeing any time card. Oh, there it is. Who can find you? Am I over time? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I am brand new at Chemonics. I started 2 months ago, and I'm heading up the Global Health Division. I came most recently from a global health consulting firm where I worked for the last 8 years or so working as a consultant with the private sector and with the Gates Foundation on a variety of global health issues. And so I'm just learning chemonics is a very large and complex place. And there are some jobs, www.chemonics.com. I asked today if there are open jobs, and there are, including some at entry level. So I hopefully will be working with some of my colleagues to figure out how to take the Global Health Division and grow it in new directions, and hopefully have greater and greater impact.
So next up we have Christine Betters. She's an app associate.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So how did I get into global development? Well, quite differently. I grew up in a really small town, a village, as you'd say, in Africa, of less than 2,000 people. And I felt like I didn't belong there. So I spent a lot of my time looking at a world map and looking for the most small and obscure places in the world, like the South Sandwich Islands or the Kingdom of Lesotho, and thinking how interesting it would be to travel to those places. And the only person that I knew in this community of 2,000 people that had a passport was my grandfather, who I learned in later life was a spy, but we won't have that discussion now. That's a whole separate one. So as I grew up, I went to college and I took any class that had the word international in it, but I still didn't know what a career looked like, because it wasn't at that point in time a really sexy thing to do. International development didn't really exist as a career that people knew about. Angelina Jolie hadn't yet discovered it. So it took really some sleuthing to really figure out what this was and how to do it. So after undergraduate, I decided I wanted to join Peace Corps. So I went through and I did the application, and they called me with an opportunity, but I'd had a death in the family, and the nice woman at the other end of the phone said, well, thank you very much, but we're going to have to disqualify you for a year because you're unstable because you've had a death in the family. Thank you very much. Call us back in a year. And as a young person, you want to move forward so quickly that you're just not willing to wait a year and put your life on hold while Peace Corps kind of waits for you to feel like you're stable. So I started applying to graduate schools and looking to get some experience. And I was lucky enough to get accepted at Columbia, where I did the joint degree in international affairs at SIPA. And then while I was there, also joined the School of Public Health and got a joint degree there, and studied French, which we'll come back to at some point and say, learn French. And then graduated and was thrilled when I graduated with 2 degrees from an Ivy League university, and someone wanted to pay me $15 a day, plus housing and health insurance to go to Togo. I thought I'd won the lottery. And in retrospect, I actually had. So I worked for Catholic Relief Services at that point in time, even though I'm an atheist. It was a great job. And then worked for a series of organizations. I worked with refugees and built a career in public health, working in conflict zones in fragile states. Actually raised a family while working in post-conflict environments. Spent 17 years of my life living in Africa, Eastern Europe, in the Balkans. And 3 years ago, moved back to the US to take a job with Apt Associates, where I'm a managing director for West Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Speak French. It was always I always got the next step up in my career because I had a skill other people didn't, or other people that were competing for the similar positions didn't have. So I would agree with my colleague here, Julie, that do something that other people don't. Anyway, more later.
Next up we have Farley Clegg-Oren. He's the global head of health practice for Palladium.
Thanks. I'm a lot older than most people here. I graduated from medical school in 1982. And in 1982, we were just seeing, I was in London, we were seeing a new disease. It was caused by a virus called HTLV1. And I got some funding to go back to Trinidad, where I was born, to start a service for this virus, which causes leukemia and also a neurological disease. And while I was doing that with NIH funding, we, of course, all experienced a huge increase in another new disease, which was called AIDS. And so I started seeing AIDS patients way back in the mid-'80s. And the collaboration that I had with the NIH. Tony Fauci was there, would you believe? He started in 1984, and this was in the mid-'80s. So I met Tony Fauci in 1984. I was offered a fellowship to come to the NIH in 1988, which I accepted. And so I ended up at NIH as a scientist, an intramural scientist. You know, NIH is a lot of extramural and a smaller intramural. And I was there from 1988 to 1995 when, and I was working with Robert Gallo. I know some of you may know who that is. He was the co-discoverer of the HIV virus. And he retired from the Public Health Service and moved to and started a new institute at the University of Maryland called the Institute of Human Virology. And I moved with him. So I had a long academic career at the University of Maryland Medical Center. Actually, the current head of the CDC was also part of that team, Bob Redfield. And Debbie Burks and I were co-fellows. It was a joint fellowship between the Naval Hospital and the NCI. It was the only AIDS fellowship in the world at the time. And so when I was at Maryland, of course, spent a long time doing international work, trying to describe not only the extent of HIV in the world, but also the impact of HIV in the world. So we used to say we were bench to bedside. We did basic science, we did clinical science, and we did epidemiology and public health. And so we were part of the discussions for starting PEPFAR. And our group was one of the first 4 awardees. It was called PEPFAR Track 1. And if you remember, that was in 2004. And PEPFAR stands for the President's Emergency Plan for HIV/AIDS. It was started by George W. Bush. It was a bilateral congressional appropriation to extend the benefits of treatment to the rest of the world, because we had it here. And it was a great thing, and it's still a great thing. And that changed my life because I left my academic practice at the University of Maryland Medical Center, and I moved to the organization I am still with. It wasn't called Palladium then, it was called Futures Group. And I can tell you the story of how Futures Group became Palladium, maybe later on. And at Palladium, where I've been for since 2004, 16 years, I am the global head of health practice. Now, what does that mean? It means that health for us, we are a global organization. We operate in 90 countries. USAID is our largest client, but we also have huge clients elsewhere, like the British government, the Australian government, multilateral institutions. Health is our largest practice. It's about 60% of the organization, and we operate everywhere. So as global head of health practice, my objective is to first of all, win projects that are important, that will have impact, that we will execute with excellence and complete the cycle of learning and adaptation to improve the population health around the world, essentially. And that is a job that we can talk about. It has many facets, but I still get to be the doctor. I'm an infectious disease doctor. I still get to be, I get to be a manager. I also get to be a mentor to young people. And we do have a lot of jobs open at Palladium all the time. So come on over, check us out.
So I want to add, the person who Farley called Debbie, who he was in training with, is kind of a big deal. So she's Ambassador Works, and she was leading all the global PEPFAR efforts. She's now been pulled to lead, not to lead, but to be on the team that's addressing coronavirus. So that's who Debbie is, if you don't know. So next up we have Julie Wallace. She's Malaria Division Chief at the Global Health Bureau for USAID.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. So what's my path been to get where I am today? And I wear a couple of hats. This is one of my titles. The other title is I'm the USAID agency lead for the US President's Malaria Initiative, an initiative that came a few years after PEPFAR, also launched by former President Bush, but I'll talk about PMI maybe in a little bit, but maybe talk about my journey first. So how many RPCVs do we have in the, awesome, all right, so I'm a RPCV as well. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the early 90s in Senegal. Before I was a Peace Corps volunteer, my undergrad was in nursing. I worked as a cardiology nurse for a couple years. I had a teacher when I was a senior year in high school, my math or calculus teacher who had been one of the early Peace Corps volunteers in the early days. And he spoke about his experience that really sort of caught me wanting to experience the same thing. But I thought that I would go, join the, there's at least one person in the audience who actually works on my team who knows I'm a fairly practical person. So I thought, okay, I'd work for a couple years, solidify my nursing skills. I'd go in the Peace Corps for a couple years, then I'd return and go right back into clinical nursing, because I actually loved my training in clinical nursing and figured I'd return. And I didn't leave nursing to go to Peace Corps because I didn't like nursing. I went to sort of have that cross-cultural experience, to use my health background to be a public health volunteer in West Africa. But Peace Corps totally got me focused on public health. So I finished 2 years. I returned back home for 2 months and returned back to Senegal to train the next group of volunteers. I'd been asked towards the end of my service if I'd be willing to return, and I planned, so I did. I applied to grad school while I was back training the next cohort of volunteers, got accepted into grad school, returned from training, and ended up pursuing a dual master's, a master's in community health nursing and international public health. And decided to stay focused for a stretch in local public health in the US. I thought I'd give that a try. I also had been, in and out of, I'd been gone for a while for my family, and I decided that I'm from Seattle, and I was getting my, I got my master's out at University of Washington. I landed a wonderful job at the Seattle King County Public Health Department. I was the refugee and immigrant TB program director, where I saw patients, 2.5 days a week, and then ran the program that included community health workers, a very almost global program with refugees and immigrants from all around the world, but primarily from East Africa and Southeast Asia. I did that for a few years, taking a couple of leaves of absence to do some international consulting with the CDC and with Doctors of the World in Kosovo and elsewhere, where I take 6 weeks of a time away, and decided with that experience that I wanted to get back more permanently into the global health space. And so I saw a fellowship position, a term limited position at USAID to work on the TB team. And I was successful at that application. My husband and I moved to DC. And then the President's Malaria Initiative got started about 3 years later. And just as it was getting going, they needed strong managers, good, people had already, come in junior and proven themselves to be good collaborators. And I guess at the time considered sort of a rising leader. And I got asked, one of a couple of people, to move over. And then I've worked on the initiative ever since. So from 2006 until now, and then risen to chief of the lead agency civil servant for the initiative. I work under the political leadership appointed by the president, and feel every day that I have a privilege to work on this amazing public health effort.
So next up, we have Joyce Pace. She is President and Executive Director of the Global Health Council.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Hi. How are we feeling? It's weird, right? Like, can't we just say it's weird right now? I work in this space. I think we've been doing it for a long time, and I'm just happy to see you guys all here, and I'm happy to be here with you, frankly. I think in moments like this too, I try to be human and kind of stand in solidarity with everyone around me. So for what it's worth, that's what I'm keeping in mind. I don't have any sage wisdom really in this moment, except to breathe and to wash your hands. But as Chris said, I'm Lois. I head up Global Health Council, which is an advocacy coalition here in DC. I want to say maybe I'm the only, I'm sure we're all advocates in our own right, but I think I have that title up here on this panel. And GHC is an interesting organization because it brings together a range of issues and stakeholders. I like to say we cover everything from AIDS to Zika. And we work with a number of organizations, a lot of implementing organizations like those here on this panel, some corporations, some academic institutions, and really just shine a light on the work that they do. You know, we see people like everyone here and all of you doing good in the world. And I think our job here in Washington is to make sure you all are in a position to do more good in the world, frankly. And how do we do that? We're talking to people in power, and we're talking to people here in DC, in New York, at the UN, in Geneva, at the World Health Organization, and saying, look, this is what's happening. And these are the people who can work with you to help get this job done. It's a big job we all have to do when it comes to global health. We have some pretty big, lofty goals. And so the more that we work together, the more effective we can be. So I like my job for that reason, because you guys make me look good. Thank you. I want to introduce Hayab, who's here with me, especially because she's an RPCV, and so she keeps me honest in this space. I was smart enough to hire one of you. We don't have any openings right now, but rest assured that if we do, we'll be looking this way. Hayab's been great in her role. She's only been with us for a few months, but she can, I think, talk fluently about what we do when we start networking a little bit later. But I guess I'll get into how I got here, as everyone else has done, except I'll stretch us a little bit and work backwards. So let's see, before I stepped into this immediate role, or immediately before I stepped into this role, I should say, I was not actually a policy person. And that's a strange thing in this town, to be someone who goes to the White House, goes to the Hill, and really not have come up in that space. I was a program person, and actually started a number of programs throughout Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa working in cancer. And so that's something else that's less unique now, but it's not really a common path when it comes to global health, because when I started, I mean, I hate to say this, Julie, but USAID was still funding tobacco farmers in the region, you know, and there was a reason for that, right? It was an economic development opportunity, but we had a really hard time convincing people, even in the global health space, that cancer and non-communicable diseases were important to pay attention to and kind of deserved some sort of space here in the work that we do. Now everyone's bought into it. But that made my job very interesting at the time, really kind of spreading the gospel of cancer and NCDs. And there were a lot of important connections that we made to HIV, for example, and obviously maternal and child health issues and whatnot. But it was, as other people have said, it was kind of cool to cut my teeth on something different and new, and that others hadn't really tackled just yet. And importantly, work with people on the ground to understand how they were facing those issues without robust resources like we were seeing at the time through PEPFAR and PMI. So that was a big lesson learned. Right before then, I actually, though, paid my dues and worked for Catholic Relief Services, although I am also not Catholic. And that was really interesting. I was one of, I think, about 25 or so fellows at the time, most of whom had gone through Peace Corps, and I'll come back to some of what I heard as to what made me more qualified to do that work, but I'm grateful that they took a chance on me and assigned me to West Africa at the time to work on very traditional global health issues. And I think that was a really good foundation for me. But really, my ultimate foundation was working domestically. And it's very interesting that a few of us have pointed to that as an experience, that we started at home. And in my case, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles and in the 80s, and it was, we've all seen the movies. It was not a good time. And it was really important for me to do something in my community. And in that regard, that was really focusing on health. And it was really looking at health as a justice issue and as an equity issue. And I can get into sort of the kind of work I was doing on the ground, but eventually I came to understand that that was something that connected people across the country and around the world. And it really motivated me to pursue that work globally. And I still include the US as part of that. And I still very much have interest in and tend to sort of float between international and domestic work. So I think that'll be an important part of our discussion tonight, and maybe an important part of your pursuits later. But I'm very grateful for that experience and that grounding, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations about that this evening. Thanks, Chris.
So we have a pretty good representation of people who are managing and implementing some very large global health programs, U.S. government perspective, and a policy advocacy perspective. So hopefully everyone walks away tonight learning something new from this panel. We're going to have some unique questions for each panelist, but we're also going to have some questions that I ask everyone. So we're going to start off with a question for everyone, and that is, what skills have you found useful as you've progressed in your career? And or what skills do you recommend people develop? What are you looking for when you're hiring people? What advice do you have in that area? So we'll start with Lois and work our way down.
I'm a people person, and I like people. It's not to say other technical skills aren't important. I have an MPH myself, but I just find in the work that I do, especially now that I'm focused more on advocacy, it's about those soft skills. And I hate to sound cliche, but I think those are things that at least I wasn't able to learn through academic training. So I think focusing on that, outside of formal institutions is really, really important. And it's everything from networking and learning how to connect dots across people and resources to really just being intuitive about what people's needs are. There's a refrain I remember someone teaching me, which is what's in it for them. There's often we show up in situations and it's like, what's in it for me? What do I have to get down? But what's in it for the other person? And especially in this work, we have to be thinking about the people we're supposedly serving and putting them in the driver's seat and putting them in the decision seat when it comes to the work that we do. So yeah, I think it's focusing on people.
So everything Lois said. No, in all seriousness, and I won't be surprised if everyone sort of zones in on this, you can learn the technical. In any position you get hired for, obviously you need to have a little bit of entry level, you learn that technical or management program component, but it's really those soft skills. It's that ability to listen, to effectively communicate, to be able to sort of meet someone when you're not necessarily agreeing, to be able to figure out, okay, where's the other person coming from? How do we actually get to a place where we're able to partner and collaborate and solve a problem and move forward together? It's been alluded to already, is language skills, if you want a career in global health, are phenomenally important. It is the francophone, it's the lusophone skills that actually, when the playing field is fairly level and there's lots of MPH graduates out there looking for the same position, those language skills are what will rise you to the top. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. Well, I think you're getting some kind of idea that we're looking for the whole person. We're looking for people who have a technical skill. There's no question about that. It's very important to do. But we also want your soft side, as Lois said, and your business side. We want you to be able to manage. We want you to understand the finances of what we do. We have a very tough client here who gives us a small amount of money, and we have to program that money very carefully. No, No, it's not small. But the point is, if you can't manage every dollar of that money, then you get into trouble. And we don't want you to get into trouble, and we certainly don't want the organizations to get into trouble. So we're looking for people who can move between these parts of their authentic selves, in an agile way. And we will support that. So we don't want you to be too unidimensional. As I said, you must have a technical skill. That's generally where you start. The language skill is really important. And of course, country experience. And this is the great thing about Peace Corps volunteers, because in Palladium, no exception, I'm sure, about half of our people are Peace Corps people. And we have people who were there from the very start of the program. They haven't retired yet. So I think you're getting the sense that we want all of you as opposed to part of you.
So my take is perhaps a little bit different. APT doesn't have as large a workforce as Palladium or Humanics, and we do not frequently have openings. So it's much harder to get an opportunity at APT at an entry level. We don't have very many entry level positions. So when I hire someone, I'm very unlikely to hire someone who doesn't have a language skill, and Spanish doesn't count as a language skill. So when you grow up, I know your parents said, learn Spanish, it's so helpful. Yes, if you're doing domestic work in the US, it is helpful, but in global health, it's not, at least to the work that we do. So even if the job I'm hiring you for doesn't require language skills, I'm unlikely to hire you if you only speak English. Because even though the job itself may not require it, other jobs that we might want to promote you into do require it. So French is the language I'm most interested in. But if you have other skills like Arabic or other things that would be the second, those are the two that I'm probably most interested in. But Portuguese is also very helpful. So that would be my first word of advice. If you aren't already fluent in French or studying it, I would encourage you to do so. And my second thing that I hire for is writing skills. You write different things at different points in life. So for example, we have our entry-level staff doing a fair bit of business development, working on proposals, and that requires good writing skills. And interestingly, it's something that is really hard to do. It's not the same kind of writing that you do in university or you do in other fields. It's being very concise and being able to take a lot of ideas and express them very well in a very few words. So we hire for writing skills. Sometimes we do writing tests, and no matter where you are in your career, it's important. As I was telling someone in the audience, I spent about 80 hours last week myself working on packaging something where I was submitting something, and I was taking the work of a team and packaging a strategic idea. And I spent, the most senior person on the team, working on packaging something in 20 pages that was really, it wasn't business development, it was redoing something that we were already doing, and I had to take everyone's ideas and put them together and put forth a strategic vision. So, and that's all writing. So that's something you do at an entry level, at a mid-level, and a senior level. So while you may think that, a couple phrases and an Instagram post is important, it is. A couple phrases on Twitter, doing it well, important, it is. But being able to write well at 2 pages, 5 pages, or 20 at any level of your career is really important, and that's what I'm often hiring for at APT Associates, or when I worked for International Rescue Committee or Malaria Consortium. Those are the kind of things I hired for and tested for.
I wanted to go back to this issue about technical skills and what Julie said about, you can learn the technical skills. And that's true, but I guess I wanted to break that down a little bit, because what I've found is that a lot of people come in and they have a lot of theoretical knowledge. They've learned stuff in school or they've learned stuff on the job, but what they're missing is the program skills, what I might refer to as program skills, which is how to apply those skills in the countries where we work in a real world situation. And I guess I would encourage everybody to look for those opportunities to really get hands-on And I was very lucky early in my career to have had those opportunities, not only to, to do real hands-on work in a variety of countries, but also to learn from some of the people in those countries who had been doing this sort of thing for years and years and had tremendous knowledge. And I think sometimes we forget that those are some of the most important people for us to learn from. And it's not just about bringing them knowledge or bringing them, offering them our skills, but how can we get ourselves there to learn. And it just came up today, as a matter of fact, and I was talking about how I learned about quality improvement. And I remembered that when I was first exposed to it, I was exposed to a model that had been developed by a Kenyan woman and somebody from my organization who also lived in Kenya. And they had developed one of the first sort of participatory quality improvement models that now have sort of become the standard in the field. And it was all done in Kenya. And I never would have learned it if I had just been, stuck at headquarters. So, so I encourage you to get out there and get that hands-on technical experience.
So I think it's important to mention that I think a lot about systems thinking, and when I talk to people who are coming up after we have all come up through school, I think there are more opportunities to actually have, I guess, more integrated training, and I look for that for what it's worth. So when I worked in the field, I think it was really important to have, have a skill or a thing that would open the door for me. But more and more, especially working in Washington, especially if you're thinking about a career on the Hill, right, or in policy, I think it is important to be a generalist and to be able to have a 10,000-foot view and not just be a thinker and tinkerer, but really look across all of our various issues and understand how they're all connected. So I felt like it was important to say, because I don't know if I was best suited for that core technical area that people were trying to force me into. And I've done just fine, or okay, I haven't done just fine. But, and so for what it's worth, I think that is also welcome in the space, although it might not be as apparent from the jobs that you see online. Those types of roles are out there for you. You have to be a bit more creative and you kind of sort of fall back into them, but I think they're available.
Thanks, Lois. So we'll move into some of the individual questions for panelists. And as I was kind of prepping people and discussing this panel, I said, what questions don't you want me to ask? And I had given them a list of questions. And Christine said, don't ask me the networking question. I am an introvert. And then she went on to tell me all of the amazing networking things that she's done. And, she has one of the most senior positions in the world and manages millions of dollars of programs. So I'm going to ask Christine to share with us some of her secrets for networking for introverts.
So I am an introvert. For people who know their Myers-Briggs type, I'm an INTJ. And so I do not belong to any associations. I've never joined anything. I've never been a Brownie, a Girl Scout. I've never been on a sports team, so I'm not a joiner. I recognize that to get ahead, you do kind of have to know people and you have to get along. Introverts actually do get on with people. They just don't kind of seek out things like that. And I manage a portfolio of $500 million. So yeah. So secrets for networking as an introvert. I could never come to an event like this and kind of walk away with 100 cards and be like, oh, I'll call all these people. And I'm always thankful that I got married before internet dating, because I could never have done that. Anyway, so one of the things I do really well is I really make the most of my alumni connections. So as I mentioned earlier, I went to Columbia, so I have a very close group of friends from my days at Columbia that I've maintained. And I have 1 degree of separation from all those people and all of their friends. And so, for example, when I wanted to change jobs, or I've been open to changing jobs, and so actually my current job, for an example, I was living in Uganda and I saw the posting for this job. And you don't just submit your CV, but it's not like I'm going to come and network, like, you know. So I looked at the job and I thought, well, who do I know that knows someone at Apt Associates? I don't want someone to get me the job. I know things don't work that way. So I looked at the job and I kind of thought, okay, well, who in my network knows somebody? So I realized that one of my close friends from school, Megan Smith, who's the principal at Banyan Global, was one of my close friends at Columbia. I was like, oh yeah, she knows Susan Mitchell, who's a vice president at Apt. I'll talk to Megan, and Megan will send my CV to Susan, who will then send my CV to the HR recruiter, who will just pull it to the top of the pile. That's not really a favor. It's just saying, look at the CV. No one's doing me really a favor other than saying, oh, look at this one. Because the HR people really don't know. I'm not anti-HR people, but they really don't know what they're looking at. And they're just pulling it to the top of the pile. So that's how I got the first interview for this job. My previous job was a similar kind of thing. Like I knew someone when I got my job. I was living in the US and I wanted to be a country director. So I saw a job in Burundi with being country director of International Rescue Committee. I'm like, oh, I really want that job. And I applied, nothing happened. I sent the note into the random HR box, nothing happened. Okay, well, who do I know at IRC? Well, I didn't know anyone, but then I remembered someone at my job at Catholic Relief Services knew someone who, and I kind of worked my network of friends and acquaintances with whom I was already kind of comfortable and kind of got my CV to be looked at by someone. So as an introvert, you can kind of work your connections with people whom you know and are comfortable, who will just get your CV in the right place, which is also just a comfortable way of introverts to network.
So we're going to go to Lois next, and we're going to ask you to share a little bit about your experience as a woman of color working in the global health development space, and any advice you have for someone in a similar situation.
How much time do I have?
There's your timekeeper right there.
It's super easy. Wow, that's an interesting question. You know, when I think, it's interesting for me to think about how I identify walking into this world and then how people see me. So one of the, I think it's fair to say, challenges I've had working internationally has been wrapping my head around folks looking at me and saying, oh, there's an American or there's a Westerner, and plugging me in this way that I think Americans or Westerners are viewed around the world. Not recognizing all the nuances that I think we hold here as like Trinidadian Americans or African Americans or what have you. And that was very humbling, and that happened early on. I think as a CRS fellow living in West Africa, for example. But it was really important for me to acknowledge that there wasn't necessarily a difference people saw between me and other folks. I think, on the other hand, walking into rooms, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about how it feels to walk into rooms as the only person of color or the only woman or the only both of those things. And I think we've seen movements such as people of color in development or women in development or women in global health that have really pointed to this as an issue. And I think it's really encouraging to look around this room and see a higher degree of diversity than people saw 20, 40 years ago. Still at leadership levels, I think it's a challenge and something that there are a number of folks trying to change and be mindful of. And why is it important? I don't think we're just checking a box in terms of diversity and inclusion, but there's a really important perspective that I think people like me bring to the table that is different. So, you know, me being able to speak to not just an experience, sort of not just showing up in a village or a situation for the first time and really saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know people could live this way, and, you know, teach me what you have, you know, teach me what I can learn. It's like, yeah, actually I have seen that. And there are a number of other people who have come from this country or from elsewhere who have experienced that. And they're sort of hidden, and people don't really realize or recognize that shared or direct experience that we can have coming into this space. And so for what it's worth, I try and sort of talk about that pretty openly. I'm not very good at it, as you can tell, so I kind of stumble because I am also an introvert, surprisingly. But the degree to which I can lift up these voices and ensure that there are varied perspectives at the table and in the room, and not just sort of a global south, global north dichotomy, which is problematic in a number of ways. But also we're allowing for that diversity on both sides of the table. That's what we try to do. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Lois. Okay, so we're gonna jump down to the other end of the table and go to Julie Becker. So for people who they already have their foot in the door, they're entry level, they're kind of mid-level, but they're interested in really getting into a leadership role in global health. What advice would you have for them? So Julie has had a lot of success for this. You want time to think about it? We can come back to you.
I was just commenting that she'd given us some of the questions in advance, and that wasn't one of them. But so getting into a leadership role. So I guess one thing I wanted to say that's sort of related to this question, and I'll get more to the point of the question in a minute, is that one thing that I think a lot of people struggle with as they progress in their career is this question of, you know, am I a technical person or am I a management person? And the field tends to put people in these silos. And quite often the structures are such that people who are technical feel that they cannot progress into higher and higher levels unless they take on management. And I think I've seen a little bit of movement toward trying to see technical as a parallel track to management so that people can grow in a technical role and get to higher and higher levels. But it's not as common as it should be. And I think what often ends up happening is people who are really good technically try to do this management stuff, and they really don't like to do it, and they're not very good at it. And they end up sort of self-defeating in that regard. So I guess I would just encourage you to be aware of, wherever you're looking or wherever you are, be aware of whether, you know, you can grow in more than one of those silos. And I think it's really important before you take a job to know, if I'm a technical person, am I going to be able to grow without becoming a management person? Some people do both well. I've done both throughout my career. I think I'm probably a better technical person than I am a management person. But the fact that I've had both, I think, has helped me get to where I am. The other thing that's helped me get to where I am is just being around a really long time and sticking with it. You know, as you heard, I've been working in this field, you know, pretty much since always, at least since I was a college student, and I haven't really deviated from that. You don't have to work in this field forever. I mean, there are people who I've seen come in from, you know, change careers in the middle of their career and come in and bring a really important skill set that people who have grown up in global health don't necessarily have, and be able to apply that skill set in new ways. And that's another way to come in at a higher level and to be able to get to higher levels within an organization. And sometimes, you know, frankly, people come into a field brand new and they think they know everything, and they really don't. And, you know, they sort of dismiss all of the knowledge those of us who have been in this field forever and ever have, and they end up not succeeding. It's terrible when they actually do succeed, but right, drive us nuts in the process. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for winging it, Julie. And Christine, I'm also an INTJ, so thank you for your advice. See? So I have a similar question for Farley and Julie Wallace, but I want to get some different perspectives. So there was some recent research that came out from the American Public Health Association. And to sum it up, there are significantly more people graduating from MPH programs than there are jobs. So it's a very competitive environment. So I want to get from Julie some advice on for people who are in that environment, how they can be more competitive, and especially if you're interested in working for the federal government. And then I want to get from Farley what advice he would have for people who are looking at implementing organizations.
Thank you. So we are hiring, and so working for USAID, there's a couple of different ways that we hire. We hire direct, what are called sort of federal employees through a competitive direct hire process. Those positions are much fewer and far between, and be happy to talk to folks after to explain why that is. But the large majority of those that come into the Global Health Bureau and other parts of the agency come in through what we call contract positions. So they'll come, we have different mechanisms that hire personnel and place them at USAID. The people who get hired in that way have USAID.gov emails, security clearances, are inherently part of the team, no different other than where they get their paycheck. And there might be some legal parameters of those who are civil servants have to do the signing and whatnot. But in any case, I give that background because we have, I think, 15 positions at different levels right now out on the street. Only a couple of those are the civil servant. Most of them are the contract mechanism. I do, and we don't always have that many out on the street, but I do a lot of interviews. I do a lot of hiring in my position and have over the years. And I'm getting to the question, answering the question. This is really practical, but it amazes me how many really qualified people who look so great on paper do not do their homework for their interviews. I think some people might do some homework and think, oh, what are some of the standard questions you get asked, and be ready to say why you want the job and what are your qualifications, etc. But one of the first questions I always ask, our panels ask, is, you talk for a second, do introductions, talk for a second about the job itself, but then you shift into sort of a little bit of background on USAID and the President's Malaria Initiative. But instead of providing that background, asking the interviewee, saying, I don't want to be redundant what you already know, just maybe want to give you some background, but before I do, could you let us know sort of what what your familiarity is with the President's Malaria Initiative and the Global Health Bureau at USAID. You would be surprised how many people cannot do the basics of the US President's Malaria Initiative. It is all over the web. It's been there since 2006. Every annual report, you can Google it. Even the very basics. So I guess my words of wisdom, to be competitive, you got to do your work. There's a lot of, I probably get 50 qualified applicants for every position that we hire. And it's hard enough screening through those great applications, the cover letter and the CVs. But then if you lose it at the first question out of the gate, it's hard to get another chance. So just do your research, do the background effort to be as prepared as you can. And then when you get asked the question, one last thing, when you get asked the question, sort of, why do you want the position? Make sure to link it to what value you're going to add to the organization. Sort of what, not just, I think this will be great to advance my career, but what is the hook? What is the thing you can bring that's going to make the organization stronger, that's going to help USAID and the President's Malaria Initiative have greater impact, save more babies, save more children, think in terms of sort of make those sitting around the table understand what it is that you bring, and make them want to walk out of the room and say, I want to hire this person.
Thanks. By the way, introverts can train themselves to be extroverted. They just need recovery time. Sometimes a long recovery time. So it's a really complex and dynamic situation with regard to hiring in this sector, I would say. You know, when I started, it was a long time ago, we had large headquarters staff numbers. And even though, for example, there are 3 of the biggest health implementers sitting at this table, our headquarters staffs have sometimes shrunk because we've had to change the balance of how we hire so that we're putting much more of the effort in the field where we're implementing and less of the effort at headquarters. We used to, in fact, Futures used to be entirely technically driven. My job used to be called Chief Technical Officer, Chief Knowledge Officer. But we've had to break down those barriers and blend things a little more to meet the demands of the marketplace. And so what you're looking for, even with growing organizations, and we are hiring, we're always hiring, you need to be able to rise to the top of the pile. As Christine said, she had a diabolical way of doing that using her network. You've got to find your own diabolical way of getting to the top of the pile. And standing out, you know, Julie says you got to do your homework. Well, if you don't do your homework, you're not going to get very far. All of you have a unique set of skills. At the same time, a master's degree is a minimum requirement to do this work. And therefore, you have to be open. You have to really excite us. And we're going to invest in you if we make the decision to hire you. We're not hiring grunts. We don't need grunts. We need people that will rise into the organization and become leaders. That's what we want.
This is going to sound really silly, but you know, back to what Julie was saying, you know, after you interview, do you know how many people never send a thank you note? It's really shocking. And it used to be just that you would never consider having an interview without sending a thank you note. And I'm continually amazed at how many people don't. And it's such an missed opportunity because you have an opportunity to reflect on how the discussion went, to emphasize things that you can tell that now that they're interested in based on the conversation, to add in a point that you may have forgotten to add in during, it's just that opportunity to sort of cinch everything and send thank you notes. Even if it's by email, that's fine. Once in a while I get a handwritten one and that's just awesome. But most people don't do that and it's not expected.
But if there's 2 really strong candidates and one said a thank you note and hooked into the conversation and one didn't, one is disqualified.
And then if you get the job, don't expect to work 40 hours a week. If you're the person who's leaving at 4, 4:30 or 5 on a regular basis, ready to get out there and enjoy your social life in DC, you're not the person who's going to get promoted.
Although work-life balance is important. Absolutely.
You're not going to be the first in line for promotion.
Yeah. What we can say is that your deliverables should be fantastic and excellent, right? As opposed to the time thing.
Yeah.
We're all trying to be more understanding of that and to not drive what we used to call heroism in the job, right?
Presenteeism.
Yeah, or presenteeism. Well, there are 2 aspects of the same thing. One is you're sitting there. The other is we expect you to drop dead sitting there because, you know, you don't have to do that.
So we've run out of time, but I have not got to ask my favorite question yet. So I think we're going to have one more question and then take just 2 questions from the audience. So this question is like lightning round question, and it kind of has 2 parts. You can choose what you want to say. Either what was the greatest obstacle in your career and how did you overcome it, or just any sort of closing words before we go into questions that you want to share you haven't gotten to yet.
I don't have anything. I think I really like what you were saying actually about being whole. I believe in us showing up as our whole selves. And I know that there are a lot of rules that folks feel the need to follow. I bridge generations for what it's worth. And so I can appreciate the kind of the standards and practices from yesteryear, and yet it's a new day. And I think we have to think and do differently in that regard. Oh, and I did think of something as I was babbling. So global health, I think the silos no longer serve us in global health. And so the more that we can think across issues and even beyond global health into development, the smarter we are and the better we'll do at the work. Okay, that's better, thanks.
So 2 quick things. The first would be, don't be afraid to take an internship. Actually, USAID Global Health hires MPH level internships, even PhD level internships. Sometimes I think those who want to get their foot in the door are concerned that, you know, they want to graduate from an MPH, and they want to, even if they have field experience, they feel like an internship is maybe not the right level or role for them. A lot of people come in through an internship, get hired on into a more permanent and meaning maybe role in which was originally the intent. So don't be afraid of that. And maybe the second thing is, and this is maybe life, not just for career advice, but relationships, building strong relationships across organizations, across, I mean, within a bureaucracy like the federal government and USAID, relationships are so key to be able to be successful and get things done. But I think with partners, with our partner country, host country counterparts, et cetera, those relationships are what help us be successful in having impact with the dollars that are taxpayer dollars that fund the work that we do. So always remember respect and build those relationships, because you'll be able to lean on them at all different points in time in your career.
I'm also blanking on the barriers. Not that there weren't any, but rather it was, things opened up based on a long career. I would say more of the enablers we haven't talked about, and we have sort of alluded to it, is that because we are representing the American people and your and mine tax dollars, we are health diplomats. And health diplomacy is the ability to have the relationships, have the knowledge, have the behavior, have the skills. It really is a multi-dimensional opportunity. And the more that you can see yourself in that way, I think it would be great for you.
So I won't repeat the wise words of the colleagues who spoke before. I thought all said excellent things. I think my career's been a little bit different in that I spent 17 years, well, the bulk of my career living overseas. So one of the things I would say that I learned during that time is just how interesting, what an interesting life experience it is to live overseas and do the work firsthand and raise a family while doing that. And I look back and I say, I wouldn't have done it any other way. So if you're interested in living overseas, which some of you may be, especially you returned Peace Corps volunteers, you may say, I did this for a couple of years as Peace Corps, maybe I want to do it as a career. I'd say, go ahead and do it. It's an amazing way to spend a career. But the way to do that is to take a job. It's difficult to get those opportunities. When I was your age, it's kind of funny to say that because, well, funny how you get to this point in life, you say, well, when I was your age, I remember my grandparents saying that, even though I'm not the age of my grandparents. But anyway, there were a lot more opportunities. You could start as an intern and then become a project manager and then become a deputy director and then become a director and then a regional director. That career path that I had and that I had the opportunity to have is no longer available to you. So my career path doesn't exist anymore for many good reasons, including that many of those jobs are now held by host country nationals, and that's a great thing. And I'm so glad the world's moved in that direction. However, it's closed off a whole kind of career track that's no longer available. So for those of you who'd like to have that opportunity, The way to do it is A, speak a language, because you'll get an opportunity to go places. And the other way to do it is to go places that are difficult to live. So there's still opportunities to work for companies like the International Rescue Committee, 5 of the best years I ever spent in my career, and live in difficult places like deepest, darkest DRC, like South Sudan, like the Central African Republic. Live in the difficult places, Chad. Live in difficult places, because once you've done that, the next opportunity will be easier to get. So that's for those of you who want an international career.
So I wanted to go back to the question of silos that Lois mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, and there are a lot of different kinds of silos, and for my entire career, I've really focused on trying to break those down, but it has been an obstacle in many ways because, you know, as I mentioned, I've worked across reproductive health and HIV. I've worked across programs and research. And wherever I am, you know, if I'm in an HIV group, I'm the family planning person. If I'm in the family planning group, I'm the HIV person. If I'm in the research organization, I'm the program person. And it goes on. And it's actually been an obstacle in some cases when I've been looking for jobs, not because it should be that way, but these silos are still an unfortunate reality. And it's not the trend. It's not the way we should be doing our work. We should be thinking in comprehensive ways and integrated ways and health systems ways. But, you know, as recently as last year, I was told that I wasn't really a family planning person, even though I worked in family planning organizations for 15 years. So be aware of the silos. They can be hard to overcome.
Thanks, guys. I don't think we're going to have time for questions, but I want to thank our panelists, and I also want to give a big thank you to Recessions Bar. They have a long-standing relationships with Peace Corps, so if you hadn't gotten a drink, if you haven't gotten food, please do so. They've been very supportive of our events. And then Brad, if you are interested in a job, Brad works for ICF, and they're hiring people on the demographic and health survey program. So if that sounds interesting to you, talk to Brad. They're looking for people. And I think we're out of time, but thank you everyone for coming out, and let's give a big thank you to all of our speakers.